Many of you probably know the story that we read today, the shepherd and his flock. Before I just go on, I'd just like to share the background of this story, especially the cultural background of Palestine. Because whenever we just read this scripture, the first question is, the shepherd, the gatekeeper, what all this about? The shepherd calls out his sheep by name, and his sheep follow. What is this about? Well, in the Palestine area, I'm not sure it is still in today, but at least 2,000 years ago, in the area of Palestine, it was usual to build a huge sheep pen and keep the whole sheep in the area together. Because they didn't have much field area, so it's like a animal apartment. Okay, they built this whole big one and then gathered all the sheep around and then let them stay through the night. And the shepherd, they hired a man and let him just keep the gate. So whom we call the gatekeeper. So the gatekeeper just kept the whole ship safe through the night. Next morning, the shepherd just came to the sheep pen and by saying good morning to the gatekeeper and walked into the sheep pen area and then called out his sheep. I don't know why, I don't know how, but for some reason, those sheep had an ability to recognize their own shepherd. Okay? So once they heard the voice of their shepherd, they moved and they followed. And the shepherd, of course, led them to the streams or the field, and so let sheep eat and drinking and play through the day. That's the background. Now you see the difference between the shepherd and the thief. The thief, you could not walk into the main gate because the gatekeeper is on watch. Okay? So that's a big difference here. But today the message is not about the difference between the shepherd and the thief. Today's message is a warning for the sheep about whom they follow. Okay. It is totally up to sheep at this moment. If they recognize the voice of their shepherd and they follow the shepherd right, and then their life is safe. They got what they needed, they were fed, and they were kept. So they got all the security. Okay? But for some reason, those sheep were just foolish enough not to recognize the voice of the shepherd, so follow someone else, then the problem will be created. If you just keep reading the scripture, verses 7, 8, 9, 10, you see that you can find the three different images of leaders. One is shepherd, the one is the thief, the one is a hiring man, which, on the other hand, the false shepherd. Okay? If you just read the whole Bible thoroughly, you could just easily learn the task of a shepherd and then what those shepherds actually did. The first order shepherds were willing to risk their life for their own sheep. Okay? So they try to provide all the necessary needs to their sheep. So making sure that all the sheep are healthy and strong. Shepherds did their best to keep them safe all the time. They just sacrificed their life for their sheep. They're willing because they love their sheep. Fifth, of course, relationship between a thief and sheep is obvious. Once the thief got the sheep, then what's next? Either kill it or sell. Right? Why? Because what they needed is not sheep, but the money. Right? If they got the hiring man, for the hiring man, as you can see it later, the taking care of a sheep is not their primary purpose. Their primary purpose is to use those sheep for their own desires. So, have you heard the terms, the sucking blood? Yeah. Those hiring men just suck the blood of sheep, blood out of sheep, to feed themselves. They don't care about the sheep, but just care about themselves. The background of all this picture is from the Ezekiel chapter 34, if I remember correct. And when Jesus taught this parable, he just mentioned about the Pharisees, which is the false leaders of the religious community. Jesus is a representative of the shepherd who is willing to sacrifice his own life for his sheep. Hiring them is the Pharisees. The Pharisees, they do not care about the life of Israel. Spiritually? No. They do not care about the spiritual truth. They only care about their own desires. They needed those people of Israel to keep their position, to keep their house bigger, to just keep the barn just full. So in the sight of God, those Pharisees just stripped the people of Israel spiritually, the day by day. People of Israel just got the skinnier and skinnier and skinnier. And then finally they got left with bone. Jesus was so mad at that. So of course, that's their fault. If pastors are not so serious about what they do, that's what could happen to the people in the church. Many Christians could learn the kind of false knowledge about the Bible. Many Christians could take a wrong path. Christians, the lay people, could believe untruth as the truth. They did their best to follow the direction from pastor. Without examining. Then what? They all ended up in a place that they didn't expect. So this could be a warning to all the religious leaders like pastors. Pastors must be honest in God's sight. Pastors must work hard to prepare the sermon and teachings. They got very careful with the interpretation of the Bible. When pastors had the wrong purpose, and interpret the Bible for their own sake, like to lead the whole church to do something that they want, not for God's glory, then this could happen. So pastors must be very sensitive with the self-examination and be honest in God's sight and try to be pure in the Spirit of God. Do you agree with that? Yes or no? Now don't worry about me. I'm not going to get hurt. So if I'm going to take that path for your own protection, you must have a new pastor and fire me. It's for your own protection. Now, how could the lay people know if they received the right instructions or not? How do you know if the sermon that you are hearing is a truth or not? Or is from above, or is from the pastor's desires? How do you know? That's the message for today. Jesus wants all the Christians not to lose their ability, spiritual ability, to discern what is right, what is wrong. As you can see from verse 4, really? When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. They know his voice. That's the nature of a sheep. Okay? Nature of a sheep will somehow recognize the voice of their shepherd. How? Because they are so used to that voice. They have this relationship day by day, every day. So they heard that voice every day, so that voice is so familiar. So whenever they heard that same voice, they just automatically recognize, hey, that's the voice of my shepherd. I should follow him. That's what happened between the shepherd and sheep. Now, how can you as a Christian obtain such a spiritual ability to discern the voice of Jesus? Is that pretty clear? In order to recognize, or in order to obtain an ability to recognize the voice of a shepherd, what do you need to do? You must have a relationship, close relationship with your shepherd. That's the first line. Right? First line. If you don't know him, there's no way for you to recognize that voice. So as a Christian, if you like to obtain a spiritual ability, then you must build a relationship with Jesus, your Lord. Spend time from morning to the evening. How do those sheep recognize the voice of shepherd? Because the day and morning, they spend their time with their shepherd. Shepherd feed them. Shepherd led them to what? To the stream. Play with them. Call their name all the times. Now the sheep are trying to listen to the voice of the shepherd. Is that what you do in your relationship with Jesus? As a Christian, do you just come to church and worship and just forget about all your relationship with Jesus? Then it will be so neat, it will be so natural for those Christians have no spiritual ability for spiritual discernment. So my family, first step for us to do is the building a relationship with Jesus day by day. And number two, when you have this relationship, then what? Once you build a relationship, then what? Remain in that relationship. Then how can we as Christians do this? Like I said, the worship is very important. The reading Bible is very important. Pray is very important. And then doing the service together is very important. Whether, regardless of your age, the kid, the 5 or 6 year old, the 10 or 11-year-old, or the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, or 100s. It doesn't matter how old you are. Just do something every day to keep your relationship with Jesus is the key word. You come to church to worship once a week. It's okay. However, the real deal is how you worship. How you worship is the most important. You can just sit out there and just relax and listen to what the preacher says and try to enjoy what the praise team sing. You can do that. But by doing that, it's so hard for you to obtain a spiritual the relationship with God. It's so hard for you to feel the presence of God. Then how can we do this? It's about your heart. Are you ready for worship? Do you seek the gift of God so hard when you pray? When you pray, are you so focused on your relationship with God? I have an experience that when I am so busy, but the habit of a prayer just kind of bothers me. So what I do is I just sit and try to pray and try to focus on the prayer. But in my heart, in my brain, it's just all about, it's just filled with what I need to do right after this prayer. So with my mouth, I'm praying. But my heart doesn't belong to that moment. It is already out there. Is this prayer? No. So our everyday practice, it just must focus on that particular moment and feel the presence of the Holy Spirit. That's what we need. So, my family, if we are so strong with this relationship with God, then we do not hear the voice of strangers. You know, when you hear the voice, you can just automatically recognize, hey, this is the voice of my Lord. Hey, this is not the voice of my Lord. You can decide. And then you can make a decision whether you should follow or not. So my family, I can hear say Christians are able to hear the voice of their shepherd and follow him over. And Christians have a spiritual ability to discern the voice of their shepherd. And this ability can be obtained by grace of God and by faithful devotion to spiritual disciplines. And that's why we dedicate to prayer, Bible study, worship, and services. Isn't that good summarized? Now, then why do many Christians fail with this spiritual ability? Why do many Christians fail to discern the voice of God? Instead, they follow the voice of Satan or voice of the world. Same reason with the Pharisees. Same reason with the hiring man. Wrong purpose. The problem with the hiring man is not to love the sheep and not to take care of the sheep with a genuine heart, but use sheep for their own desires. Is that correct? Wrong purpose with the Christians is not to glorify God, not to love God, not to love one another, but to just feed my own desires. Later we may have a chance to study about prayer life. If you just examine your prayer life, you could just learn very easily what you pray for, what you live for, will tell whether your proposal is right or not. I'd like to conclude today's sermon by sharing this story. It's kind of fun story that I heard years ago. So, after getting all of Pope Benedict, okay, this is about Pope. After getting all of the Pope Benedict luggage loaded into the limousine, the driver noticed that the Pope is still standing on the curb. "Excuse me, Your Holiness," says the driver. "Would you please take your seat so we can leave?" "Well, to tell you the truth," says the Pope, "they never let me drive at the Vatican, and I'd really like to drive today." "I'm sorry, Your Holiness, but I can't let you do that. If I do, I'd lose my job." Then Pope said, "Who's going to tell?" Reluctantly, the driver gets in the back seat as the Pope climbs in behind the wheel. The driver quickly regrets his decision when after exceeding the airport, the Pope just accelerating the limo to 105 miles per hour. "So please slow down, Your Holiness," pleaded the worried driver, but the Pope didn't listen. He just enjoyed his driving. Then the Pope just kept driving until the policeman stopped him. The driver just got fear of losing his license. The Pope pulls over and rolls down the window as the cop approaches. But the cop takes one look at him, goes back to his motorcycle, and gets on the radio. "I need to talk to the chief," he says to the dispatcher. And Chief gets on the radio, and the cop tells him that he stopped a limo going 105 miles per hour. So Chief said, "Why don't you bust him?" But I don't think we want to do that. It's really important, says the cop. The chief then asks, Who do you have there? The mayor?" The cop said, "No, it's bigger." The chief asked, "Senator?" "No, bigger." And the chief goes again, "Is it the president?" The cop said, "No, bigger." So says the chief, "Who is that?" The cop said, "I think it's God." Chief is even more puzzled and curious. "What makes you think it's God?" "Well," says the cop, "well, his driver is the Pope." Let me ask you a question. Who is driving your car? Or who do you follow today? I believe all you wants to have Jesus as your driver.